Hello, you beautiful, beautiful people. This is Aaron the Pedantic, and today I'm going to be talking to you about why I left 5th edition behind and why checking into this glorious thing that's called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons has, in many ways, sated a lot of the concerns and problems I had with 5th edition. So, I know I've said it a million times on the channel, but for anybody who stumbles on this, I did not start with AD&D. I didn't start with 3rd edition. I didn't start with 4th edition. I started with 5th edition. I had my very first game around 2017 or so. So I have not been in this hobby for an incredibly long time. I'm just incredibly enthusiastic. I do a lot of research and I do a lot of games, and I love it. But the important thing to note is that I do not have the nostalgia that you may expect from somebody who's about to tell you why AD&D is cool. Instead, what happened was I found myself dissatisfied with various aspects of 5th edition. And as I made little complaints here and there, oh, I don't really care for this part. I don't really care for this part. There were people that I would encounter that would say, well, you might actually like some of the old stuff because the things that would address that are things that people used to complain or still complain about the old stuff. So maybe that actually would interest you. And so I began my journey into old school style play. And inevitably, that led to playing 2nd edition AD&D. And now I'm preparing my first edition game of D&D that I'm going to be running. So that has been the journey thus far. Now, here are some of the things that 5th edition kind of drops the ball on that AD&D picks up and scores a touchdown, in my personal opinion. So the first one is AD&D has an incredibly strong relationship between mechanics and implied fiction. So what I mean by that is that one of the things that really chapped my ass about 5th edition is something that a lot of people love about 5th edition. So I understand this is going to be preferential, and there will be people that are going to say that's good. They should do it that way. But when it comes to what I want, it doesn't really serve my purposes. 5th edition is designed in such a way as to make it so that you can describe how things work in a lot of different ways. Because what it does is it breaks down everything into some very fluffy fluff as far as the narrative of how things function and all that kind of stuff. And then it provides you with mechanics that are very legalese that tell you this is how this functions. And as long as you can make this work within the syntax of the system I'm providing, then yeah, you got an argument for why that could be the case. AD&D doesn't really do that. AD&D is going to tell you explicitly how these things are related. So one of those things is how magic works. Magic is not going to be something that if you read the section on magic in 1st edition, that you're going to be left wondering, why is it that I can't cast more quickly if I'm hasted? Well, it's because there are certain incantations that you have to pull. There's certain ties to the way the reality works. There is fiction that it's drawing from that uses as inspiration with the Jack Vance novels. This is just how it works. And if you try and dance around it, which a lot of people are like, there's really not a good reason why you couldn't cast an extra spell. You get an extra action, right? And that's how they say in 5th edition. But with this, there is just the understanding that no, that is never going to happen. It is not going to happen because magic takes a certain amount of time. You look at how many segments it takes to cast your spell. That is how long it takes to cast it. In order to cast the spell, not only do you need to meet your VSM or whatever kinds of components, but your character has to speak them aloud. They can't be gagged in any way. They can't be restrained in any way. They have to be able to move. All that kind of stuff. They can't just, get up and run around. They've got to stop and then do their whole incantation and all that kind of stuff uninterrupted. They are easily interrupted if they are attacked, if that comes to be the case. In 5th edition, none of this applies. It's just, no, you're going to get your spell out and it's going to be cool. That because of that, and there's some other stuff that kind of feeds into that, but a lot of these mechanics and narrative being married to each other as they are in AD&D makes everything feel more substantial to me. It lets me know exactly where we stand. When we come to the table to play first edition, there is a very, very strong chance that I already kind of have an idea of what the DM is thinking as far as what is plausible and all this kind of stuff, because that stuff's kind of grounded. But with fifth edition, it's like, well, if the rules don't say that you can't, then maybe there's an argument we could use. And while you could do that with first edition, the book just flat out tells you don't do that. I mean, it genuinely does. And you can always choose to ignore the book. You can absolutely do so. But there is a solid argument for why at that point you're not really playing AD&D exactly. You're not quite playing it in a way that with fifth edition, I can sit behind rule 0 very comfortably, and I can sit behind all the things that Wizards of the Coast puts out saying, oh, it's fine. It's fine. You can do whatever you want as long as everybody's having fun. It's still D&D. And they try to mute it into being as much of a general thing as you can possibly think of. That way, everybody feels like they're part of D&D and they're part of the brand, they're part of the lifestyle, and they're part of buying more products. That's not to say that there's not marketing in first edition. It's pretty it's pretty direct. But yeah, so magic is one of the things. Another one is the relationship between classes and their inspirational archetypes. So when you think of a bard in fifth edition, you have all kinds of things that can come into mind. And typically it's going to be, well, they're going to be some kind of performer and they're going to make magic happen with some kind of performance, whether that is them playing music or telling a story or poetry or singing. Or even if you look at the College of Swords, it could be a way that you perform your sword play or something like that. There is a great amount of leniency as to how these things happen. And not so much in first edition. In first edition, a paladin is a paladin. A paladin is lawful good. They have very strict things that they have to follow. And this makes the expectation of a player who's playing a paladin a lot higher than it is for a player who's playing a paladin in fifth edition. The understanding is that if you don't play it correctly, your deity will punish you. And yes, people could pull out the existence of the anti-paladin and all that kind of stuff that came later, but we're just talking core books here, guys. We're just talking core books. If you want to talk about that stuff, then fine. But that being said, as far as how everything is represented in the core books, it's great. It's great. It puts that stuff into perspective. To be a bard is to go through this great process. And whenever you get through the end of that tunnel, a bard is a bard is a bard. They are going to fall within these certain narrative parameters that have been laid down. And you get the opportunity of taking part in that at the table. And it sounds like, well, there's not a whole lot of room for me to grow or be creative or all those kinds of things. But really what you're doing is you're missing the entire purpose. I'll get to that later as well. But the inspiration behind the cleric is a lot more straightforward. There is no neutral cleric, because if you're a neutral cleric, then you're probably going to be a druid. Because a druid is a type of cleric. There's just all kinds of things that are built into each other. An assassin is never good. An assassin is evil because they kill for money. That is exactly how it is. And yes, people in the Discord, on my Discord, who are going to point out that I argued for why there should be a neutral assassin, get off my back. They're not going to be good. They are never going to be good. Those kinds of things have value whenever you take them and put them together. The relationship between races and inspirational archetypes. Now, a lot of people, they're going to say, this is part of the reason why I'm not interested in this old school styles, because it doesn't let me be really creative with how I express this character type. Well, the thing is, I get it. I get it. When I started with 5th edition, I was like, you know what? I would love to play an orc, sorcerer, or wizard, because it's kind of weird. You have a character race that is often considered to be not very smart. And then you have a character class that when paired with it, it's kind of the juxtaposition. It subverts your expectations. It's kind of witty and fun and refreshing or whatever. But here's the thing. I've had subverted expectations for a long time. That's the kind of fiction that I have had thrown at me for ages now. It's just all the time, every time. And what I have found is that it feels kind of gimmicky. Whenever you're really chewing into the meat of this kind of subversion of these archetypes and things like that, what you end up having is something that's kind of shallow, kind of superficial. Whereas whenever you really embrace these archetypes and go into them at their fullest, then everything feels a lot more natural. And you could say, well, you all of that is hingent upon the fiction that you're presenting in your game world. Yes. Yes, if you present in your game world that orcs are actually the most intelligent, then I would probably expect them to be tremendous magic users. That's not really the problem at hand. The problem at hand is whenever you are subverting it just for the mere fact that you want your character to be different from all of the others. And that kind of feeds into some other things. This desire to want your character to be different all the time. I want to say that it lends itself for this more term play that a lot of people have, where they get kind of sick of their player. They use them like this rag doll. They've used up this really creative concept that they were super happy about. But whenever they got to experience it, it is kind of gimmicky. The rest of the meat is going to have to come from how they really build that into the world and all those things. And that's something that you can do normally and without having to deal with all of the issues of having this weird juxtaposition between why your character is different than all of the others that should be just like them. Or maybe they shouldn't be. Again, it depends on your world parameters. AD&D has very specific world parameters built in. Not only does it tell you that your half orc is never going to be a magic user, your dwarf is never going to be a magic user, but it says that your half orc is probably going to be not good or lawful. It's going to be probably evil or chaotic, and maybe neutral at best. Maybe neutral. And they're going to lean toward being thieves and fighters and assassins. And maybe you might work a cleric in there, but they're not going to raise, themselves to a great high standard of clericdom. That's just not going to happen, because the kind of support for those kinds of things don't really exist in the world. That's not really stated, but it's kind of implied. But there's a lot of those things that are built in that whenever you leave it behind, whenever you come to the table and you say, I'm going to play a half orc, there are people that are raising their eyebrows, because this means something, because the archetypes mean something. Whenever you say that you are going to play a cleric, or more importantly, a paladin or a ranger, we'll say a ranger, there's a lot that comes with that. You're not going to be, taking a whole lot of stuff with you. You're not going to be looting things all the time. You are a person who lives in the wilderness, who is part of basically an order, and is going to rise in the ranks of that order and eventually be okay having people serve under you and things like that. But you're not going to amass wealth. That's just not who you are. You are going to have certain ways that you approach things. You are not going to be evil. You're just never going to be evil. Those kinds of, whenever the things have been violated, it falls apart. You've destroyed the archetype, and you're going to be punished. You are going to be punished by just being a normal fighter. There's just all kinds of stuff like this built into it that I think is fascinating. And it just means that you are given a much more narrow avenue in order to explore these things. And because of that, because you as a player are not just like, well, I have this blank canvas and I can do just about anything with it as long as it falls within the certain mechanical parameters. Instead, whenever you have this very narrow understanding of what these archetypes represent and you're having to work within that, that means that you are building richness. You're building depth. You are not just hurling this really special character that you into this game and just hoping that it sticks, and everybody just kind of gets sick of the the fact that it's, oh, my character's so special and unique. No, it's your character is interesting because of the things that they do and because of how they separate themselves from the others within these parameters. Once you violate those archetypes in such a great degree, it's you don't leave a whole lot left. You just don't. There's just not a whole lot left there. So that's just it's just cooler. It's just cooler, guys. That's just how I look at it. If this doesn't ring with you, then it's probably just in my head. We'll see. So another thing, the decreased emphasis on builds. So builds are definitely a thing in 5th edition. People will, work with their feats. They will pick their subclasses. They will do all kinds of multi-classes. They will pick their spells. They will do all of these things to try and determine how they can get the coolest setup possible to be the best at certain scenarios, to beat the game at the rules of the game. Basically, that is one of the things that people really greatly emphasize on. And you know what? People can absolutely engage with those things in some ways that are not obstructive and frustrating and all that kind of stuff, if they are working within the parameters of what does this mean for my character? Like what does this say about my character? What does this say about the world and all those kinds of things? But a lot of people, they tend to approach these as mere just mechanics in a vacuum that they just want to enact at the table in whatever way they can possibly manage. That's not really going to happen so much with AD&D. So as far as spells go, spells are randomly determined. You do not know if you're going to be able to get this spell or that spell until you roll to see if you have the ability to learn that spell. Even if you find that you have the ability to learn that spell, you need to find the scroll so you can copy it into your books. Or you need to go and find somebody who can teach it to you. If they know how to do the spell, then maybe you have to work with them. You have to barter with them in order to get them to teach you how to do the spell. Maybe that means you have to work in their employment in some way. Again, leaning into some of that Vancian stuff where Turgeon learns how to create the artificial people in vats after doing a quest for a powerful wizard. So because of that, that means that your magic users are not going to be copy paste of one another. You're not going to see, oh, well, this one's got fireball, this one's got fireball, this one's got fireball. No, because there is going to be a pretty decent chance that you didn't make your roll for fireball. Maybe you didn't even make your roll for lightning bolt. Maybe you are having to get very creative. Maybe you couldn't even get the really good stuff. And so what you had to do is you had to come up with magical research, and now you have your very unique spell. And you know what the DMG says? The DMG says that you, as a dungeon master, don't tell the others about that spell or how it works. It's between the two of you. So that means they get to be unique magic users, genuinely pretty darn unique magic users in ways that 5th edition just doesn't really support. When it comes to what kind of choices you make when you make your character, well, you get to choose what kind of weapons you're proficient with. There are such things as non-weapon proficiencies. There, depending on the if you're getting 2nd edition or if you're, whatever, using Unearthed Arcana. But those are still relatively minor. When it comes to multiclassing is an endeavor. It is an endeavor that is specifically limited to your demi-humans. So your humans are not going to multiclass. And if you do multiclass, you don't split it. You don't just split it. No, what you do is you level those classes together at the same time. It makes you level up slower, and you split the hit die for it. It's cool. It lends itself to something that just makes more sense. Dual classing, for those who don't know, dual classing is kind of complicated, but it's really not that bad once you sit down, you work it out. But it's only for humans. And basically, what it is you leaving your old class behind to develop the new class. You keep your HP and you use the abilities of your new class. If you use the abilities of your old class, then you don't get XP for whatever you were doing. And you level up that class until you exceed your level in the previous class. And then you take a new hit die and you're able to use the abilities from the previous class. So you're leveling up slower than everybody else for a while, and then eventually you get to have the abilities of multiple classes, and it's organic because you don't just wake up one day and you're like, oh, I'm level this, that means that I get to be a new class. No, it means that you went and you found a trainer of that class and you learned how to do that class. And so you started playing that class and you developed them from the ground up, and you're not just bouncing around back and forth or anything like that, because if you go back to your old class to level that one up again, then you lose everything that you did on the other one. So it is beautiful in how it handles that, in my personal opinion, and it is a lot less prone to just that kind of my special build pony situation. Is it still there? Yes. Does it have the same effect? Not really, because you're going to have to work for it, and people don't like working for it these days. They like milestone leveling. They like just getting to the next point in the story, then being told, oh, okay, so you got your next level. Oh, okay, well, I'm going to put it in, the class that I've literally never touched in my life or even had anything remotely to do with. But Aaron, you can home rule that, that they have to like role play it or whatever. I don't care what you can home rule. I'm sorry. I don't care. Don't care. Okay. So there are such things as kits. Those were such a thing that were created, but for the most part, unless you get into very late second edition stuff, the effects are going to not really be, they're not pivotal to the system. They're not understood to be pivotal to the system. Everybody knows that they are optional, and a lot of people just don't like them. So they just don't even include them. So they don't really get included that often. My looks into kits, I actually like a lot of the things that it says about them, because it has cool things to say about the world and their function with the world and all this kind of stuff that makes me think, fodder for more long-term play. Mwah. Yes, but it's just not going to foster the same kind of build craziness that you see in current day. And that makes me happy. So the next thing that it really, really addresses, in my opinion, is increased emphasis on organic character development through long-term play. One of the things that I see quite often in 5th edition groups is this idea that my character has been predetermined to have these kind of plot points. These are the things that I want that character to face. And look, I've been part of it. I created a character with certain problems before in a campaign, with the expectation that, yeah, maybe I get to work this stuff out at some point. I have done that before. But you know what came of it? It didn't feel authentic, because here's the thing. Either the DM gives it to you or they don't. That's typically how it's going to work out, especially depending on if the way that you're planning on your character to develop is it hinges upon how the world is going to react to everything that you do. Then a lot of times it's gonna be handed to you. I want to have things to do with my family back history that I created or whatever. Okay, so the DM has to decide: am I going to put that around, or are you going to take it upon yourself to go revisit and then make me put that stuff in there? Which of those is going to happen? A lot of times the expectation is just put it in front of me. Just put it in front of me. And people explore those kinds of things. And like I said, because they have this expectation of this is what my character is going to do, whenever they get to the table, they don't get to experience organic character development in a way that you do if you take your time and you go in there without a whole lot of expectations for what exactly is going to make your character super duper special or whatever. If you go in there with the expectation that my character very well could die, and this would, prove for naught. All of our planning would prove for naught. It completely changes how you approach the game. I created my second edition cleric with the expectation he could die at any moment. I didn't even know that he had parents for about a year of play. So, and guess what? He's been a blast to play. I love that character. People love that character from what they say. They may be lying to me, but you just don't need it. You just don't need it. Um, Death is fairly likely. You die at negative 10 HP, and if you're under 0, then you start bleeding out. And how likely is healing? Well, healing is you gotta plan for it a lot of times, and it takes time if you're doing it naturally, and it's not overly abundant. It's pretty much going to have to come from your clerics or your paladins. Generally speaking, it's pretty much where your healing is coming from, with few exceptions. So when it comes to resurrection, yeah, you could come back to life, but there's a built-in percentage based on your constitution saying there is this much percent chance that you won't be able to come back to life. You're just irrevocably dead. Sorry, deal with it. So because of that, instead what you focus on is growing the character as long as they stay alive. And you know what? It's a pleasant surprise whenever you continue whenever you get to continue playing this character. They're not dead, and then you have these things happen at the table, and you get to incorporate that into what is affecting your character and how they're going to respond to the situation. And then it just feels organic. It's not this pre-planned narrative that we had figured out. This thing that feels incredibly forced because we're trying to stretch it through maybe 6 sessions if we're lucky, that kind of thing. Because a lot of people don't play for a whole long time because, again, they just dart through this shit, like a bat out of hell, just trying to race toward the finish line of super cool story ending and all this kind of stuff. So that's one of the things that makes people take things a little bit differently. Another thing, there is tons of emphasis in the Dungeon Master's Guide about domain play. There is emphasis about it in the player handbook that tells you you're going to get these amount of followers. This is people. These are people that you can hire and keep at your stronghold in order to be able to produce these things. Whenever you are training, it's going to take time, money. Everything takes time. Everything takes money. And you are constantly trying to balance these things and make them work out in a way that lots of time is going to pass in the world. You're going to be spending a lot of time at the table, slowly working your way up into something that is awesome, that you feel like towards the end, dadgummit, we have earned something. We never had shit handed to us. That DM was fair at best. And that's the most that I expected from the DM. And by golly, I'm happy that's what I got. That is the kind of perspective you get to have after all of this kind of stuff. So, passing of time, construction, rest. Rest can take 4 weeks. You can take 4 weeks to get your hit points back. Worst case scenario. Training is going to take weeks to get to your next levels. Whenever you are creating an item, it could take months. Whenever you're creating a stronghold, it could take a year. There's just all kinds of time. All this stuff is going on. So while that is going on, that means that you get to spend downtime being like, okay, well, while this character is doing construction of this, they're doing their research. This one's doing their training, because you level at different times, because that's how it works. Then I'm going to be doing this. I would like to handle this or whatever. I'd like to handle this. I would like to handle this, so that you are not just embracing super epic story time, so that you are actually just working within the world and building relationships with the NPCs and all this kind of stuff. And everything just starts flowing into itself and creating this symbiotic campaign. This is why a lot of people say it takes years to get to the point where your character is really something significant. It takes years of play because of that fact that you are building into this thing. It is, you can't just turn on the gas, turn on the car whenever it's freezing outside and then just start driving and expect everything to be hunky-dory. You got to let it warm up, guys. You got to let it warm up. And that's what AD&D is about. It's about letting it warm up and getting the big payoff. So Initiative and surprise. This is one of the things that people love it or hate it. I love it, and I love a lot of things like it because of the way that it makes you make interesting choices whenever you're playing the game and do not really know exactly how it's gonna happen. It's not a binary. So one of the things that you do is, for one thing, being smart about how you move through the environment is incredibly important because surprise, oh my God, surprise can ruin you. You can take 2 rounds of attack, well, not 2 rounds, 2 segments of attacks from a creature, from an entire party of creatures before you get to do anything if they catch you with your pants down. And because of that, you don't want them to catch you with it. Could be actually, no, it caps it too. Um, you don't want to be caught with your pants down in AD&D. You could be dead before you get to do anything if you're not careful. And then whenever it is your turn, guess what? You roll initiative after you declare what your actions are going to be. So what you're doing there is you're saying, all right, I want to try and do something before this happens. Or I'm going to do something that's going to take a while, but it's going to be worth it. That is basically what you're doing. You're going to roll the initiative die, and then whatever comes up for your party, you're going to have to calculate that into your segments. That's how long it's going to take for you to cast your spell. So if you've got a 4 that comes up for your side's initiative and you're casting a spell that takes 6 segments, well, guess what? That guy over there who's throwing a dart at you, that's only going to take just no time at all, who rolled at a lower segment, they're interrupting you because there's a good chance they're going to hit you. And then your spell is interrupted and it's gone. It's gone. You don't get this, you don't like get to keep the spell slot. There are no spell slots. It's gone. You fucked it. You fucked it up. So it's, oh, I love it. So what about using weapons? People often complain, well, my choice of weapons doesn't really matter in D&D, and that really kind of sucks. In AD&D, it does, because there is weapon speed factor. There is weapon speed, depending on if you're doing first edition or second edition. There are modifications to the armor class of the enemy. There's adjustments based off of what weapon you're using and what armor they have on. So because of that, it may be more expedient for you to use a mace than it is for you to use a longsword, because by golly, they've got some serious plate on, and I just can't pierce that with my sword. I can't slash it very well, but I sure can bash the ever-loving heck out of them. Or maybe I can pierce them with my war pick or something like that. Or, if you just want to say screw everything, then get on a horse and use a lance. It makes those things matter. You're more likely to hit them when otherwise maybe you're not likely at all. And if you're attacking an unarmed opponent, then that dagger, boy, that dagger, unarmored opponent, that dagger is good. It's good. Those kinds of things make all of that interesting. Now, what about whenever you are fighting somebody and you're using a really slow weapon and they're using a weapon that can be used very quickly? They might get to attack you twice. They get to attack you before and after you go. That is the kind of thing that can happen. And a lot of that's based on initiative. So there's all those kinds of things that make your choices very important from moment to moment. And you get to constantly risk and get rewards. And it's beautiful. It is beautiful to happen. Spell memorization, making those decisions. Oh my God. So in 5th edition, you can just say, well, for today, I'm going to prepare this spell, this spell, this spell, this spell, this spell, this spell. And I can use my spell slots to cast any one of those spells any number of times, as long as it is the correct spell level that I need. And that's it. So yes, there is some preparation involved, but it's very generous. In AD&D, that is not the case. You have to decide, I'm gonna prepare 2 Cure Light Wounds, and I'm gonna prepare 1 Blessing. Okay. So does that mean that if I cast my 2 Cure Light Wounds and I need to cast another one, that I can just drop the Blessing and cast that instead? No, I've already asked my deity for my spells. My deity has already given me the knowledge of how to make that happen. Has already given me their blessing. They've already had an agent of them come down and give me that blessing. I can't change my mind right now. Same thing with magic users. You have to decide, out of all of these spells that you have on your spell book, which you're going to have quite a few eventually, then you have to decide which ones do I need today? Which ones am I probably going to need today? And you have to decide how many of those you're going to need today. And if you decide poorly, ooh, that's bad. That's unfortunate. But if you decide well, oh man, it pays off. It really pays off. I already mentioned less healing, but I feel like mentioning it again. You're more likely to die because less healing. You're not incredibly likely to die. This isn't BX, but it's still pretty likely. It's pretty likely that it could happen. Okay, so all of these things are things that made me interested in AD&D and make me want to continue playing it, make me incredibly excited about my upcoming game that I'm going to be running in Greyhawk. So the questions might remain, okay, well, how hard is it to get this stuff? Well, I would like to direct your attention to these beautiful things right here. So this is the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook. These are, actual legitimate printings. These are not print on demand. And, you could get these for roughly about the same price as you would get the 5th edition versions brand new. So, whether or not that's worth it to you, guess what? If you want to get it cheaper, you can, because you can get on DriveThruRPG and you can get a print-on-demand version of these exact books for pretty darn inexpensive, for roughly, 25, 30 bucks, somewhere in that range. And you can do that for each core book. You can just do it for the player handbook if you're just going to be a player. If you're going to just be a player, I recommend that you stay out of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Don't let it pervert your ways. Gary said so. But yeah, it is not expensive to get into that. And let's say that you're okay with looking at retro clones. Well, retro clones do not cost a lot of money. You can get the rules to Osric, which is basically AD&D first edition with some changes. They don't have weapon speed factor. They don't have the monk. They don't have the bard, but just about everything else is pretty much the same. And it's worded a lot more easily understood. And it's very inexpensive. You can get it for free as a PDF legally. And you can also get a hardcover copy that is only like 27 bucks or something like that. And it looks good. I like it. It's sitting in my bedroom because I read it a lot. But in any case, you could do that. There's for Golden Glory, I think is I haven't played that one, but I've heard it's good. It's 2nd edition one. They're not expensive. You can get into this very inexpensively. So that shouldn't be a factor. To me, the biggest factor, the biggest thing that might make it hard for people to get into AD&D coming back from the early editions, the newest editions, I'm sorry, is going to be how hard it is to get a group together. Getting an in-person group together can be difficult. I know that I have a local group that I could play with here, but they play in a time that I'm not available. So I can't play in that game. When it comes to playing online, there is a very healthy stream of people that are interested in playing. Like I said, I've been in a 2nd edition game for over a year. I've had to take a hiatus because of my work schedule, and it breaks my freaking heart. I can't wait to get back into that game sometime in the near future. But yeah, it's not going to be super easy. It's not going to be as easy as getting into a 5th edition group, but it's possible. And by golly, if you can do it, it's worth it. A lot of the people that are going to be interested, they're not going to be under 40. That's just true. I am under 40, but I am the exception, not the rule. Most of the people that I've encountered that are interested in AD&D are about 40 or older. Most, at least over 50%. So because of that, if you have a problem with gaming with older people, you might not really have a whole lot of feasible opportunities unless please evangelize it. Please evangelize it and try and get younger blood into AD&D. I would absolutely love to see that. I personally would love to see that. Some people are going to be like, no, gatekeep. I would love to see more people playing AD&D. So make that attempt, but for all intents and purposes, it might be kind of hard for you to manage it on your own. So there is that to deal with. But if you can get it lined up, then there is a campaign that could last a long time and could be just glorious. It could be absolutely glorious. And I think it's worth fighting for. So that's what I'm hoping to provide for my players. That's what my friend Saxius has provided for us with our second edition game. And, it's been the best D&D I've ever had. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I know it's kind of lengthy, but there's a lot to go on here. There's just a lot. There's a lot of good reasons to play AD&D. And I feel like you need to know it. So, like, share, subscribe, I guess. Most people that view this channel are more than half are subscribed already. So, that's neato petito. But yeah, I think that's all I've got. Y'all take it easy. Peace out. Oh, and let's say that you don't want to play AD&D. Get the Dungeon Master's Guide anyway and read it, because by golly, you're going to learn something. All right. Peace out.